Hey guys, it's Gary. I'm back after a couple days, at least 2-3 days off, as far as making videos goes. A couple of reasons for that. Actually, I had an old friend contact me, somebody I worked with many years ago, I've known for about 25, 26 years. And he came by for a visit, first visit in 2 years. Actually, he was actually the first person outside my family to come visit me when I moved here about 2.5 years ago. And he came here in the summer of 2013, a few months, maybe 6 months after I moved in, somewhere around there. Haven't seen him since. Good buddy I worked with for many years, and it's weird when he left the job about 7 years ago. And you go from seeing somebody every day or 5 days out of the week to not seeing them at all. And he's married. He lives in New York City, but he's about an hour away, and traffic and everything, probably distance-wise, isn't that far. But the city. So talking to him on the phone, and he actually came by yesterday. We did a bit of a jam session, percussion, just two guys playing percussion. I'm sure my neighbors appreciated that. And he's primarily a drummer. Started off on drums, started playing keyboards very very quickly. Just self-taught. Got pretty good on keyboards, better than me. And now he's picking up guitar, and I'm afraid he's going to get better than me on guitar in short shift. So anyway, I'm incredible how fast my buddy Glenn picked all this stuff up. So I listened to him play guitar and actually recorded a little thing of him playing guitar yesterday. And we had a long percussion jam. And I was playing tabla drums mostly, and he was running around the room banging on everything. It was nice. It was nice. And a late night. I'm still tired. Didn't get to bed till about 2:30 this morning, so I'm definitely off. I'm definitely messing my schedule up majorly. Thought today I would do something. I got some music things in mind. I think I want to do a little more listening before I proceed. We're doing a music thing because I have some new CDs, and maybe want to give them a listen before I comment. So I thought I'm stealing an idea from my good buddy Carm Gorvo31. Thought I would show a few books. Now, in my case, I'm going to keep these musical because most of the books I read are biographies or autobiographies of musicians. Not exclusively, but that's probably 90% of what I read. And let me start showing them because I'm gabbing on here a lot. And I'm probably going to do more than one of these because I just there's some books I did want to show in the first video, but I've got so many others. Some of you guys may be familiar with Peter Green. This is a very good biography on Peter Green. He's really the guy that started Fleetwood Mac. And Fleetwood Mac, long before Stevie Nicks era and Lindsey Buckingham era, essentially was a blues rock band in the late 60s in England, and really started as a three-piece. Peter Green on guitar and vocals, and pretty much wrote all the music. Mick Fleetwood on drums, and John McVie on bass. They added a couple guitarists in there, so they had a three-guitar lineup, but it was very, very much steeped in blues. And actually, I cherry-picked the stuff that I actually like from Fleetwood Mac. I do like some of the Peter Green era. I like the song Albatross, the instrumental Albatross. After Peter Green left, they got Bob Welsh, an American, in, and I like some of the music quite a bit. Some of the music had a nice jazzy feel that Bob Welsh created with Fleetwood Mac, the late Bob Welsh, and that was some great stuff. Honestly, I'm totally lost interest once Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham was in the band. I have no interest in them whatsoever. That wasn't my reason for actually reading the book. This book, from what I remember, because I don't think I have another one about the early history of Fleetwood Mac, its focus is Peter Green, but it's pretty much the origins of the original Fleetwood Mac, as well as, I read Mick Fleetwood's autobiography. I think he just recently published a second one, but his first one that goes back maybe 10 or 12 years ago, which is very interesting because that was full of stories of the original band before they were a big band. When they were a band playing blues in blues rock in clubs in England mainly, and the nutsy stuff that they did. So that's I tend not to read. Let me say now, my interest is not in any bands that are so big or musicians that are so big that they don't have to work for a living. So you're not going to see me reading a book on like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. There would have to be even a band like Fleetwood Mac, though. In the case of Peter Green is not a rich man. He probably makes a decent income from these old records being still available, thanks to the pop edition of Fleetwood Mac, helping to push their back catalog. The main reason I was interested in this is not even the music so much, because I'm not a hardcore fan of even the Peter Green era. I do like a bunch of tracks, and that's it. But his interesting story, and anybody who knows who he is knows the mental problems that he's had, including being homeless for a number of years. He had a tough life. He stopped playing. Fairly psychologically damaged person that had problems dealing with the success of Fleetwood Mac. Even the early edition of Fleetwood Mac had a certain amount of success in England, and nothing like what they became. But they were, they had they're like a successful cult band fairly early in their career, and Peter Green had some guilt over the success apparently, and not sure about how he felt about the money, in terms of perhaps feeling guilty that he was making a reasonable amount of money when people were starving and things like that, and really got to him. And he actually became homeless for a number of years. The nice thing is, in recent years, he's kind of got it together, and he has even toured in the last decade or more, and started recording albums again. But he had a rough period, and of mental problems and spiritual quest that kind of got him off kilter. So, interesting person. See, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Picture him what he looks like now. And if you see this, picture, if you read the story, probably do your heart good, because he had a lot of years struggling with how he felt about the world in general, and it was really the cause of his problems. And for that reason, it's an interesting book. Not even from the point of view that of songwriting or musicianship or anything. I just happen to know who he is because he was a musician. But the big part of the story is kind of his mental decline and the bad years that he had. It's a fascinating story, and that's I put him in the category of working musician, because I know he's probably got some income from the old Fleetwood Mac records still coming in, but he's probably a guy that's not living the lavish lifestyle, that's for sure. And interesting history. I kind of like stories about real people, about people that have had difficulties and aren't rich and can't afford to really just sit there and do nothing. Hence, obviously, if he was raking in all this money, he wouldn't have been homeless for the number of years he was. So it's a good book. Not an autobiography, but I read this a long time ago. But to Vangelis, who, again, I'm not a hardcore Vangelis fan. I think the guy is really a very creative musician. I tend to like his earliest works. Kind of like Guitarro. I like Guitarro's earlier stuff too, even though it's a lot simpler than the later stuff. But this is a book probably more written by a fan. It's got quite short, small print. So even though it's not a big book, there's a reasonable amount of information in here. I'm trying to find out when it was published, because this is not a new book. But it's a pretty decent overview, kind of, by a Mark Griffin. And actually, I realize this is a British import. It's got doesn't even have the dollar amount. It's got the amount written in pounds on here, what the book costs. And I just realized this. I have no idea how much I paid attention. It's actually signed by the author. Where did I get this that it's signed by the author? Very interesting. Where did I buy it? I bought it from... I bought it from the artist shop. Wow. The Order Shop Mail Order Company. I bought it in 1998. See, this is why I hold on to receipts, guys. 1998 I bought it, so the book is not new. I never even realized it was signed by the author. He must have gotten... Artist Shop is a guy that, imports a lot of mainly music CDs from outside the country, because I'm pretty sure you might be able to get this on Amazon now. I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if it's still in print. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be up to date, but for me, the more interesting stuff is the start of someone's career, how they got established, the early struggles, once they make it. And again, he's a guy that, I'm sure he's not hurting for money. I wouldn't normally probably read a book by somebody this successful, but I wanted to know a little bit more about Vangelis because I do like some of his music, his early music especially. I think is particularly good. And he's an interesting, quirky guy that pretty much follows his own path. And that's what I like about him. He is a guy with a singular vision. Even though he wasn't Aphrodite's child, he was started off in a rock band in a Greek rock band, I believe. But very quickly went his own way. Seemed to be the guy, the people with the vision that don't initially have the support of anybody are the guys in music that are interesting to me. He just started doing his own thing and built and created his own studio to do it in, and thankfully was successful enough in the early days, probably by getting movie soundtracks, because quite a few of the very early albums that I like by him are actually soundtracks for foreign movies that I've never seen. So he's an interesting guy, I think a quirky guy. I can't say much about the albums that he made with John Anderson from Yes, because I don't think they're very good. And even for a John Anderson album, I don't think they're very good. They're certainly not very good for Vangelis albums. But he's an interesting guy. And one of those guys that I would love, actually all these guys that I'm probably showing books, but I'd love to see a real serious, hardcore, detailed film documentaries done on these guys. I think would be very interesting. Here's somebody that you probably never heard of, Mick Abrams. An autobiography written by Mick Abrams. Mick Abrams was the original guitarist for Jethro Tull. Not a band I listen to much, but a band I'm probably more interested in reading their history than listening to their music. Interesting thing with him is he was the original guitarist for the band, and originally the band was essentially co-led by him and Ian Anderson, but he left after the first album, and he formed another group, and kind of very interesting story. I had to get this as an import from England. Again, I don't think that it was released over here. And Jethro Tull was pretty much a cult band even for the first album. But it wasn't the kind. I don't think it doesn't appear to me from what I read that it was like a multimillionaire cult band kind of thing. They were fairly popular, I guess, in England right from the start as a cult band. Like I said, Mick Abrams left after the first album just because of musical differences, and formed another group that I heard of, but I never heard their music played. So it's one of those bands that in the late 60s, early 70s, you probably would hear the name of the group that he went and formed, which I completely blanked out on right now what the name is, and did a Bloodwind Pig. That was the name of it. I had heard of Bloodwind Pig. To this day, I might have actually gone on YouTube and finally heard a track. I remember seeing Bloodwind Pig albums in the racks in the early 70s, but they were one of those bands I don't recall ever hearing them played on the radio. That was a real cultish band, maybe underground, maybe like a college guy kind of band for a few years, but that got this band too, so they didn't have great success. Very interesting story though, because Mick Abrams kind of got fed up with managers and people like that in the music biz, ended up leaving for a number of years, and sold insurance, had very interesting side jobs. These are the books that I'm interested in, because it's the kind of a guy that you know, and as a result I actually ended up getting the first Jethro Tull album. Actually, I bought it from my brother-in-law, who's a bit older, and he's a late 60s blues rock fanatic. He knew Jethro Tull, but he only knew like the Aqualung album. And I said, well, you like blues rock, and their first album is more blues rock than Aqualung is, certainly. So I bought him the album, and I got to hear it from there. Pretty, a good blues rock band. I'm not a big blues rock fan, but yeah, it was good. What I expected, maybe even a little better. Their first album, called This Was Jethro Tull. But again, he's a working guy. When Blood Wind Pig broke up and he got fed up with the music industry, he couldn't sit around doing nothing. He had to go work for a living, and he had a number of jobs, some of them like physical labor kind of jobs, before he went and sold insurance, and in recent years has started performing again. That's locally in England. I'm pretty sure he stayed in England. Mostly club-sized dates and doing little recordings, independent recordings that aren't selling a million copies or anything, but a real working musician, a real working guy, not a guy that can sit back and decide not to go into work today because he's got huge bank accounts that he's sitting on top of. I kind of wonder why guys like Paul McCartney even bother to tour anymore. It's like, why bother? With all the money they have. This is a bit short. I wished it would have gone on a lot longer. He goes into the history of Jethro Tull. Doesn't dig any dirt. No nasty stuff really. He's an older guy. He realized, it's kind of when you're young in your early 20s and you have musical disagreements, everybody gets all fiery about it, and as men in their 40s or 50s and onward would never get that upset and split up bands over these things. But that's the way life is. And interesting, these are the books I like when it comes to musicians. Guys that maybe I know a little bit about, but are guys that have had to work for a living and struggled and even worked outside of the music industry just to get by. It's always interesting to hear how that weighs on their vision of their own music, because they have this balance of they're struggling to get by like a lot of us are, and also make their own music, but also doing other work just in order to get to that point. So it's not like I'm going to just sit around and wait for inspiration to happen and sit on my bank account, because they can't. Very good book. Very good book. And despite what I said about liking people who actually have to work for a living, not independently rich, I'm going to show this only because I think this is such a fantastic book. Frank Zappa, again, I appreciate some of his stuff. I'm not a fan. I'm not a hardcore Frank Zappa fan. I'd pretty much only listen to like some of his instrumental stuff. Couple of the albums here and there. I've got them. I've got CDs of his, and I realize I've still got shrink wrap on that I never even opened. The thing that I like about this book, it was written by Frank, so it's not about him. I would have never bought it if somebody else wrote it. These were really his insights. It wasn't an autobiography. This was only done a few years before he passed away. Not really an autobiography, which he states in the book. He tells some anecdotes if there were unusual occurrences or funny things that happened in his career. One of the very first chapters is titled, "How Weird Am I Anyway?" Understanding that most people's concept of him is just of a total oddball. He talks a little bit about growing up, about his the early stuff, forming the Mothers of Invention. Even before that, his love of music, how he taught himself music by going a lot to the library and taking books out. Talking, it's not a year by year chronological book about his life, because it would have to. It's a pretty big book, but it would have to be considerably bigger. It's more like interesting stories, his view of the world, his view of other musicians. I have to say, there's a couple instances of these books I have where, as a person, I don't think I like Frank Zappa very much. He didn't actually seem like a real nice guy. But an interesting person all the same. Much like Evangelos, really. He kind of had his own vision. He was smart to keep control of his music throughout his career, and that's something that most musicians can't do, or don't think to do, or just incapable of doing it. But he maintained control over most, if not all, of his music. But the book is it's good for people who aren't necessarily fans of his music. Maybe some of the songs I know that he refers to I might not have ever heard of. So he doesn't go into a blow-by-blow of recording a specific album or anything. It's more like interesting stories, some stories on the road. I like the stories, like I said, the early years, the establishing of the whole career and everything. The early years when you were struggling to get by. Those are my favorite stories. And it's a good read. I mean, again, you don't need to be overly familiar with him, but you need to know a little bit about him and, the public perception of him too, which is why I love that. How weird am I anyway? He gets into his anti-drug stance, I believe, on here and stuff like that. Like I said, not a nice guy. I never actually thought he was a very nice person, but interesting all the same. And here's another guy. Now, I don't have a single Searchers album. The bass player for the Searchers, and I don't even know if this guy, I'm pretty sure he's a bass player. This is another book that was an import, a British import, that didn't come out on America, at least as far as I know, that I got from England. And it's just stories on the road with the Searchers. I don't really know anything about the Searchers, except they're an instrumental band. Very, very popular in the UK, but really almost totally unknown in the U.S. And I don't even know if he's an original member or not. He was a bass player. Let me see, frontman and bass player. He was in the band for a long time, and he was in the band in the '60s. And a lot of the stories in here are the early days. I think I was a bit having trouble finding at the time another book to read on musicians at the time that I bought this, because I didn't specifically want, like I said, I don't really care about Paul McCartney's millionaire lifestyle or Roger Waters' millionaire lifestyle. But there's he talks about the Hamburg Club in the '60s, and a working musician. This was a band that I think even with their popularity in England, it didn't carry over here, and America is where unfortunately the big money is. So you can be popular, do well in England, and still just be making, I guess, a decent living, but not getting rich. Forward by Cliff Richard, the British singer, and Mark Knopfler, interestingly enough. On here, when was this book come out? 1999. Didn't realize it was that old. But let's see. He's got the whole family tree of the Searchers on here. Guy's name is Frank Allen, by the way, and I don't know if I said that. And you see, the Searchers actually looks like they started in 1957. That's an old band, and he was not apparently an original member. So that's interesting. But a long-time member. He was in the band by the mid '60s, '64. It looks like he joined, and if they're still around and they still tour, which I think they do, I think he may actually still be in the band. At least at the time when this was written in '98, he was still in the band. That's a long time. But it's road stories, which I love. And obviously and most of their success was really the mid to late '60s. So after that, when you're dealing the '70s and '80s and '90s, they're not a Rolling Stones level Metallica pop band anymore. So they're more of a working band, and this is more of a job, at this point. And those are the kind of things that I find interesting. Like I said, not the millionaire guys, with their, renting out an entire suite in a hotel or something. I remember liking this when I read it, but I read it quite a long time ago. Bought this on Wes Montgomery just because I like him so much. I love Wes Montgomery. This is not so much a biography. It's a very thin book. Hal Leonard Publishing Company. $20 for this little thin book, though. That's a lot of money. They say it's a biography. They very, very quickly go over his life. I wish it was more in depth. There's a lot of here's his chording technique and playing technique and things like that. So there's some stuff in here specifically for musicians. The chord shapes he uses. Great stuff to know if you're a guitarist, which I am. but kind of not really what I bought the book for, or what I actually wanted to read in the book. It lists his compositions because he didn't write much. Most of his tracks that he recorded were jazz standards, and discography, which is nice to have. At least, it's never going to be up to date. By the time you publish a book, it's out of date. But nice discography on him. But I was hoping for a bit more information about his personal life and his struggles. I know he had a lot of kids, and he was working day jobs and night jobs. Even when he got his first earliest recording contract, he was still working day jobs and playing like a nightly. This goes to show you how long ago this was, in the late 50s, even early 60s maybe. There were still like jazz clubs that had live performance jazz bands playing every night of the week. And you can't even imagine that now. And these were just little small local neighborhood clubs. I'm not talking concert halls. Nothing like that around anymore. It just doesn't exist. So it goes into, like I said, it talks about his life. It has quotes from other guitarists on here, but not enough about really his personal life. Not a bad book, though. The Band. Here again, I seem to be going back on my word. The Band, the guys that originally backed Bob Dylan. Interesting book. I got this really cheap. $6.99 I got this for. This is a big, thick hardcover. And actually, I think, well, Levon Helm died recently, definitely after this book was written. I'm not sure if was it Robbie Danko? Rick Danko, the bass player, died. I'm not sure after this book was written, or he may have died before. But there's only two guys left of the original five members. Only Robbie Robertson is left alive, and Garth Hudson, I believe. Yeah, Garth Hudson. Particularly tragic story. And the five guys never really reconciled, thanks to Robbie Robertson, largely, it seems. Robbie Robertson was the guy that kind of wanted to go to Hollywood and make it big, which he did, and he remains there to this day. And Robbie Robertson, sadly, actually even owns the name of the band now, with the 3 of the 4 other band members passing away, and the only surviving guy, who I'm pretty sure is Garth Hudson, being in such desperate financial straits that he had to sell the rights to the name of the band to Robbie Robertson just to avoid being foreclosed on his home. And Levon Helm, before he died, was holding concerts in Woodstock, New York area where he lived, which is not far from here. He played these, I think they were called midnight concerts or something like that, where everybody that's famous would come by and kind of jam with him. I believe in a barn or something like that. They were kind of very loosely arranged, and people would kind of pay money to see these kind of loosely arranged jam sessions, and it was in the end what Levon Helm was basically using to pay his mortgage. So despite their success, man, did they have some hard times. These guys had a band with a lot of bad luck. Bass player Rick Danko died, I believe. But one of the members, was Richard Manuel, committed suicide while the band was on tour after they reformed without Robbie Robertson. And Rick Danko died. I want to say he might have had heart failure or something like that, but he had a drug problem. And that was apparently the thing that really brought that on. So very, very sad kind of tragic band. And in the early 70s, they were successful. They were doing well. Good book. It's a good book. This is particularly interesting. Another guy that's not a very nice person, but I think I don't know anybody that can say that Miles Davis was a nice person, including band members that I've seen made comments. Somebody said that when Miles passed, he left the best of him behind, which was his music, which was definitely true. He was not easy on people. This is a particularly interesting book because it was written by Miles' son, Gregory Davis, I went on Amazon and I read people's reviews of this, and they tore up Gregory Davis for writing this book about saying, about whining and moaning about his father and how badly he was treated by his father. It's the truth. It's how he was treated. What do you? I totally don't get that. I think it's a fine book. I think it gives a better insight into Miles than any biography written on him by people that didn't know him. Some biographies have been written on Miles all over the place by people that were fans. But this is the guy that actually lived with him, knew him, and actually did a lot of taking care of him during that 5-year period. I believe it was from 75 to 80 roughly, when Miles just stayed in his New York brownstone apartment and didn't leave and didn't record and didn't play live concerts during those years. And I remember Miles telling his son Gregory, who was taking care of him basically during that time, that when Miles sold the brownstone, he was going to either give him the brownstone apartment, which was substantial, or give him the money for it. And then Miles turned around and sold it and just kept the money, and poor Gregory Davis. But it's not Mommy Dearest. Anybody knows Miles has problems, and every biography that's been written on him acknowledges them. So it's not like there's things in here that are unheard of. It kind of just backs up what has in the past already been written about Miles. And even, I guess he admitted himself as far as the drug problems and the people whose company he kept that weren't the best people to be around him. I think it's a really good book. I would still buy it and read it again today. I think Gregory Davis does a fantastic job writing it, and more power to the guy, because he really got screwed over, basically, for lack of a better term. And I think it's a good book. And of course, no book collection is complete. I'm not going to show one. I think I might save it for the next round because this is going too long. No book collection is complete, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, without the novelization of the 1964 movie Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. This movie came out in 1964. It's in the public domain, but the book. It's such a deep movie, and there's so much substance to it, that the novelization of the movie did not come out until 2005. And although you're thinking, well, what does this have to do with all the music biographies? Not much, except the song that starts off the movie, which is Hooray for Santa Claus, I believe was actually released on a 45 single at the time the movie came out. And by the way, the movie was filmed in a suburb of New York. I forget where it was, but it was in an empty, unused airplane hangar. So talk about independent films. Hilarious! It's a funny movie. I just had to buy the book. What can I say? Sorry, guys. I'm trying to do two things at once. All right. Actually, I was holding off my favorite book of all time for last, and I think I'm going to show it. I think I'm just going to show it. It is. I didn't want to go this long, but it's Straight Life: The Story of Art Pepper, Saxophonist. This is the second time I bought this book. If I only had one book in my life, fiction, nonfiction, anything, to take with me, this would be it. I've already bought it twice. I'd buy it again. Funny thing is, I'm not a hardcore Art Pepper fan. In fact, when I bought it, I was looking for biographies on jazz musicians or creative musicians at the time in the very, very early 80s when I came across the first edition of this, which I read to shreds. I just kept on reading favorite sections over and over again once I had gone through the whole book. At the time, I had no Art Pepper albums, actually. I had heard him. I had heard his music on a jazz station. I knew who he was, kind of. I didn't know much about him. Didn't even know he was a West Coast musician. Didn't know anything about his history, his background. But was so desperate at that time, there's very little to read on, especially jazz musicians, but any creative musicians in terms of biographies or autobiographies. So I bought it when I saw this at a bookstore. Absolutely incredible book. Read it cover to cover, and then reread it, and then I have favorite sections in here that I'll go back to and just read. And it is, you're probably never going to read in your lifetime a book this honest. He was a badass, and he had problems, and he admitted it, but the way that he writes about it isn't in a bragging sense. What I thought was originally a biography of a guy who happened to be a jazz musician, so talk about his record deals, his touring, his the creation of his music, of his albums, dealing with record companies. That's not much of the book. Actually, it's probably less than half of the book. What I didn't know is that Art had severe drug problems. As a result of his addiction problems, he got in with a bad crew, and because he wasn't a jazz musician making a ton of money, he didn't have a lot of disposable income. He ended up falling in with these bad crowd and doing things like burglaries and serving jail time and getting out, and just the whole cycle of going into jails, getting out, doing more burglaries, breaking and entering, things like that. And I think a lot of people would try to color this over and try to explain it away, and he doesn't. He explains, at the time my thinking was so messed up, I didn't care. I just wanted to be the badass. I wanted to be respected by the hoods that he was hanging out with. And the whole jazz music in his career became secondary for a lot of years. It took him a long time to get his act straightened out, which he finally did. But it's written by his last wife, I think that was his third wife, Lori Pepper, who basically really put the book together, sat down with Art, and had him go through his whole life over and over again, pulling out all the details. So she really is the one responsible, otherwise this book wouldn't be out. And I had read the first edition so much, the book was basically shreds. And then I went looking for a second copy. In the interim, Art had passed away. I think Art died maybe about 2 years after the original book came out. And so the original book was fairly complete, just missing the last couple years of his life, but for the most part there, he was kind of back in the game of playing and recording albums again, and he rebuilt and reestablished his career and his reputation. Because he had died in the interim, Lori Pepper, his wife, went in and filled in the gap.
Not in a big way, but there's an extra chapter that basically picks up where the book left off, explaining the last couple of years of his life, how he died, when he died, and those details. So it's an absolute now complete book. So I'm glad I bought the second edition. I'm glad that I read the first edition to shreds. Art was a wonderful saxophone player, kind of from the mainstream bebop school. Didn't write a lot of his own, did a lot of standards, that kind of thing. But if you have even the slightest interest in Art, in the life of a jazz musician, especially a life of a drug addict coming out of the late 50s, early 60s, and how that just perverts every aspect of the rest of your life, and how he basically lost his entire career for a number of years. It also was the first detailed account I've ever read of Synanon, which was a West Coast facility that has its own history, that originally started as a place where people like Art, like addicts, would go to live for free, and they would work at various jobs within the Synanon community, which was a big building that housed many people who didn't pay to be there, from what I understand. Most of them were addicts who just couldn't survive on their own and stay straight in the outside world. So they joined Synanon, and Synanon basically, I guess, was partially funded by government funds. And I guess certain people that stayed there did a certain amount of work, maybe, that could have generated income, like maybe selling baked goods or something like that. I'm not sure exactly. It's been a while since I read it. But Synanon, oddly enough, as good as it was for these people, eventually you would leave Synanon, but you would be there for, sometimes in the case, years. And a lot of the folks that left there went on to live with other people that had left Synanon, just as a way of a coping mechanism, so they wouldn't get back into the destructive lifestyle that they were in previously. But I had first heard of Synanon in the late 70s, when somehow over the course of its fairly long existence, it turned kind of into a cult. And the people that ran it, or maybe the new people that came in and started running it started changing things, and it became essentially like a big cult instead of this kind of facility where people went necessarily to get help. And they were probably bringing in a lot of the same people, but they were kind of indoctrinating them into this cultish kind of existence. And then it closed down. I had first heard of it when somebody wrote a book on it shortly after it closed down, and I would love to see a book. The only books that I've seen in reference to it now are long out of print, but I would love to see somebody go in and do a really in-depth biography of Synanon just after having heard of it on this talk show on the radio in the late 70s, and then having read the details here, which was before it got to that point. But knowing what it became, it's very interesting to hear the experience of somebody that went and lived in it prior to this kind of changeover that happened to Synanon. Absolutely fascinating to read a book. And the only books that I ever saw on it were quite old and out of print. It'd be great if somebody could go in and do an updated version of it, talking to people that had lived there at the time. It'd be a great, fascinating book. Okay, guys, so I'm going to call it a day. I've got some other books, but I really, Straight Life, I could have done a whole thing on just Straight Life. Incredible. And naturally, as a result of getting this, then I started buying Art Pepper albums, naturally. But what an interesting life, and just not unapologetic in the sense that, like, I'm a badass. He's just dead on honest in a way that I have never seen before in any autobiography. Doesn't really try to explain away his bad behavior. It's not really writing about it in a show-off way. He's just writing about his badass escapades when it was like here's how messed up my thinking was when I was out on the streets and I was robbing, people, and I was willing to shoot people if I didn't get what I wanted. Things like that. Absolutely fascinating book. Anybody who likes jazz, you get a real taste for the real dark side of jazz lifestyles, but also, and he does talk obviously about music and how he got mistreated by a few members of other jazz musicians, some fairly well-known sidemen that backed up a lot of people that weren't necessarily leaders in their own right. But if you're into 50s jazz, you would know who these guys are, who basically played behind Art, but behind his back were basically making fun of him because he wasn't a black guy playing jazz. It's basically what it comes down to. So he's had, he had quite a few obstacles to overcome. So great book. I would never be without this book. Okay, I went longer than I intended to. I showed really the primary books I wanted to show. I do have others, but I just wanted to do something a little different. And I'm kind of still tired from getting to bed at like 2:30 in the morning. So I'm kind of the record thing might be too many facts swimming around in my head as far as music goes that I probably would forget and wouldn't get out. So I thought I would do the book thing. Okay, guys, hope there's some value to it. If you like reading and jazz, I think this is the one. This is the one, and the one by Gregory Davis, by Miles Davis' son, is really interesting stuff to read. Okay, guys, I'll be back soon, and I'll be back with music when I come back. As always, thank you so much for watching and commenting and everything, and I hope everybody's having a great day. Bye.